Chapter 4, The Promise of the Governor's Return. When the end becomes the means, and the minor becomes the major, then injustice is inevitable. Before looking more closely at the king's plan to restore the governor, let's review some major points regarding the kingdom of heaven and its plan for the colonization of earth. The king of the eternal and invisible kingdom desired to extend his own nature and influence to the physical realm of earth, which he had created. The kingdom of heaven is his governing influence over the world, impacting and influencing it with his will, his purpose, and his intent. Heaven is God's kingdom or home country, and earth is his colony. Human beings were created in the image of the king and were given the spirit of the king to live within them. The king's spirit gave life to their spirits, souls, and bodies. Human beings were designed to function like their creator king. The presence of the spirit of the king within human beings guaranteed that they would have his character and nature. It also assured that they would be able to rule on earth as he would rule in the heavenly kingdom, having his very nature of love, mercy, kindness, and forgiveness. The king did not desire to rule the earth directly, but to cultivate his colony through his children, who also functioned as his local governors. They were to exercise dominion over the earth under the direction of the chief governor, the spirit of the king. Adam and Eve's declaration of independence cut humanity off from the king and caused the governor to be recalled by the kingdom of heaven. The departure of the governor meant the departure of the heavenly government and its direct influence over the colony of earth. After humanity rebelled against the authority of the heavenly government, the king immediately promised to restore the governor to his children. The most important promise the Creator King ever made to human beings was the promise that the governor would return to live within them because he is the key to life. The restoration of the King's Spirit to humanity is central to the restoration of his kingdom on earth. All the above leads us to this conclusion. The principal purpose of the redemptive program of the Creator King in his dealings with humanity throughout human history was the restoration of the governor to the colony of earth. In light of this, let's consider the theme of the sacred literature of the Old or First Testament, also known as the Jewish canon of Scripture. Some say its theme is the creation of a monotheistic religion. Others say it's the story of the rise and fall of the ancient Hebrew nation. Still, others see it as the record of various traditions and rituals. If we look at it in any of these terms, however, we miss its crucial essence, the theme and significance of the Scriptures. What is the significance of the Scriptures? Why do we have the accounts of Noah, the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the story of the nation of Israel? What was the purpose of all the blood sacrifices? Why is there a record of priests, prophets, and the lineage of kings? While its events revolve around the people and nation of Israel, the theme of the Old Testament is universal. It is the restoration of the key to humanity's existence, the reestablishment of true life for every human being on the planet. The record of the people and events depict the unfolding of the King's plan to restore his spirit within human beings so they can be and do what they were originally intended to, so they can fulfill their remarkable purpose and potential once again. The first 2 chapters of Genesis explain the heavenly government's plan for expanding the kingdom to earth. The 3rd chapter describes the interruption of this plan and the immediate promise of restoration. From the 3rd chapter all the way through the last book of the Old Testament, the king's plan for the return of his governor to earth is revealed. All the situations, people, and programs we read about serve these ends. 1, they are a continual reminder of the promise of the governor's restoration. 2, they depict the king's intervention in the lives of specific families on earth to preserve a lineage for the offspring who would restore the governor. 3, they depict a prototype of the restoration of the kingdom of heaven on earth. 4, they expose the fact that only the governor himself can reconnect the earthly colony to its heavenly government. And 5, they foretell the coming of the offspring who will personally reconcile the children citizens to the king and authorize the return of the governor. In other words, after humanity's rebellion, the king's intent was essentially this: my purpose in creating the world was disrupted, and I'm going to correct it. My spirit can no longer live in the earthly residence I created. I will therefore restore my spirit to humanity so my kingdom can function on earth again. Everything depicted in the Old Testament about the intervention of God in the lives of human beings was ultimately a means to this end. God was revealing to humanity, in effect, here's the program. Your rebellion has put you in a hopeless situation. I'm therefore going to come on the earth personally, and I will provide a way of restoring purity of heart and wholeness to you, so that the governor can come to live in you again. Second, I will reappoint the governor to the colony of earth to live within you once more, and carry out my desire to transform the earth into a reflection of my kingdom. Humanity's need for holiness. The Old Testament emphasizes the fact that when Adam and Eve lost the Holy Spirit, humanity became unholy. I think this word has so many religious images connected with it that we don't really know what it means anymore. We find its essence by looking at what the Creator King told the nation of Israel. You will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. In this instance, he's using the word holy in relation to a nation. He's obviously not talking about wearing a cross or a liturgical robe or entering a religious order. So what does the concept mean? There are 2 related connotations of the word that I want to emphasize here. One of them is pure, and the other is devoted or dedicated. These words signify, first of all, something that is set apart specifically and purely for a certain use. In this sense, holiness can be applied to many things. For example, I could set apart my favorite cup and say, this may only be used by me for drinking hot tea, nothing else. I've sanctified it by setting it apart and dedicating it for a specific purpose. Thus, the word pure in this context means something beyond just clean. It has to do with being pure in use. In relation to human beings, the king said his people needed to be holy unto me. How can you be holy unto a person? Holiness in this connection means I am devoted only to you. Not only am I dedicated to you, but my loyalty to you is not tainted by any other loyalties. I have no ulterior motives. Next, let's look at what it means for the Creator King to describe himself as a holy God. Does it mean he's devoted to himself alone? No, it means that he is true to himself. He is faithful and consistent in who he is, what he desires, what he says, and what he does. I associate the word holy with integrity. The king is fully integrated or unified. His nature is so pure that he can never have an ulterior or deceitful motive. This is why the king cannot lie. This is also why the king father can never disagree with the king's son, who is the offspring who came to restore the governor. And this is why neither of them can disagree with the governor. The three persons of the Creator King are one, or integrated. Having personal holiness, therefore, means to be one with yourself. When Jesus of Nazareth told his disciples, "Be perfect, holy, just as your King Father is perfect," he was saying, "Be one with yourself, as your King Father is one with himself." Here is the practical application. If you say that you will do something, you do it. If you promise something, you fulfill it. If you're truly holy, you can never say something and then do something contrary to it. Your public behavior is the same as your private behavior. Nothing the king does is ever in conflict with his nature so that he has to hide it. You don't have to hide anything unless you're saying or doing something that is contrary to what you say you are. Adam and Eve had been totally integrated before they disobeyed the king and then lied about it, destroying the trust he had placed in them. The central issue of the Old Testament is that when Adam and Eve rebelled, the Holy Spirit had to leave humanity because human beings were no longer pure in motive or integrated in themselves, and consequently were no longer set apart for God or in agreement with him. The governor is a pure spirit and could not live in intimate relationship with humanity in that environment. Stages of the king's plan. When human beings cut themselves off from the governor, the king was faced with a supreme challenge. Human beings needed to live in his presence and to have his presence within them. However, their current state would not permit this. If he wanted to restore the governor to his children and continue his purpose of having the earth reflect his kingdom, something had to happen to change their state of being. The king's plan to fully restore the governor unfolded in stages. 1. He implemented a program that allowed the governor to come upon people, although not within them, so as not to violate his integrity. His spirit could come upon any person who chose to submit to the influence of the heavenly government. Since the governor had been recalled and was therefore illegal on earth, he would come and rule in someone's life when that person yielded to his prompting and direction. This wasn't the same influence over the entire world that was in place before the rebellion. It was what we might call selective rulership or rulership by submission. 2. The sacrificial system which the Hebrew people practiced, and which we will talk more about shortly, allowed the governor to work on earth through a special nation of people who were meant to be a prototype of the return of the kingdom to the whole world. And 3. The king himself would come to earth to restore integrity to humanity and thus provide a way for the governor to again live within human beings on a permanent basis. Understanding the Creator King's program to restore humanity puts the entire Old Testament in the proper light. It is not a group of stories strung together or a handbook of rituals. It is about the king initiating his restoration program. In Genesis, when the king said that the offspring would come and crush the head of the serpent, this was actually the first promise that he himself was coming to earth, incarnated as a human being, and would defeat humanity's deceiver, reconcile his people to himself, and restore the governor. The prophet Isaiah wrote, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. In this sense, Christmas really began in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. The King Father was preparing the earth to receive the King's Son, and the old sacrificial system would be replaced by a permanent sacrifice made by the King's Son himself. The New Testament writer to the Hebrews, quoting Psalm 40, wrote, "Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me." From Genesis 4 onward, therefore, the King Father was working to set apart and preserve a lineage dedicated to his Son's eventual coming to earth. Let's take a fresh look at the Old Testament from this perspective. Influence over Earth's environment. The governor's presence on earth through the submission of individuals to the heavenly government was always accompanied by the manifestation of kingdom influence over the earth's environment. In other words, when the king made himself known to people and they responded by yielding to him and his redemptive purposes, miraculous things would happen on earth. Yet what we call miracles were not extraordinary from the point of view of the kingdom of heaven. They were natural outcomes of the influence of the heavenly government in the lives of those yielded to the king. Noah and the flood. After the rebellion of Adam and Eve, the culture of the world became so evil that it had to be virtually destroyed in order to preserve a lineage for the coming offspring. This is why the Creator King came to a man named Noah and instructed him to build an ark to save himself and his family from the flood that would destroy the rest of the earth's inhabitants. His message was essentially this: Noah, the people of the world have become totally wicked, and I need to preserve a pure lineage. Therefore, I'm going to start over again with you and your family because you have a heart that is obedient toward me. Notice that the king's words to Noah after the flood were almost exactly the same as the ones he had first spoken to Adam. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth." The king was continuing the same program with Noah's family that he had begun with Adam and Eve. He did not change his original purpose for humanity on earth because of the rebellion. Instead, he was working out his plan to restore it. Noah was not the actual source of the restoration, but was part of the pure, set-apart lineage that needed to be preserved for the coming of the offspring. The worldwide deluge and the survival of Noah and his family on the ark were the result of the kingdom manifesting its influence through the faith Noah placed in the king and his ultimate purposes for humanity. Abraham. 10 generations later, Noah had a descendant named Abraham, and the king's plan of preparing a lineage and a body for himself started to take more specific shape. He told Abraham that even though he and his wife were old, they would have a child. This child would be the beginning of a great nation, which in turn would be a prototype of what the kingdom of heaven on earth was supposed to look like. Moreover, one of his descendants would be the promised offspring. Sarah's ability to conceive and bear a son in her old age was a result of Abraham and Sarah's willingness to cooperate with the purposes of the heavenly government. Although they did not fully understand the plan, their relationship with the Creator King brought about the next stage in his redemptive purposes for earth. Both Noah and Abraham believed and obeyed the king's instructions. Belief and obedience were the means of their holiness or righteousness before him. Righteousness refers to right standing or right alignment with evident authority. And Noah and Abraham lined themselves up with the government of heaven. The tribes of Israel. Abraham had his miracle child, Isaac. Isaac had twin sons, Esau and Jacob. And Jacob was chosen as the one to carry on the lineage. Jacob's name was later changed to Israel, which means prince with God. He was the heir of the promise of the coming offspring. Jacob had 12 sons, and each son's family grew and became a large tribe. This was the origin of the 12 tribes of Israel. The Creator King chose Jacob's son Judah as the one through whom the special lineage would be carried on, even though all the tribes were destined to play a part in the unfolding drama. The Israelites, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Eventually, the 12 tribes moved to Egypt because of a famine in their homeland. They were preserved through the heavenly government's intervention in the life of another son of Jacob named Joseph, who became the Egyptian Pharaoh's second in command. But the tribes eventually become slaves of Egypt under a different Pharaoh. After several hundred years, the Creator King called a man named Moses of the tribe of Levi to free the Israelites as part of his plan to preserve a lineage for the birth of the offspring. All the events we read about in the life of Moses show the manifestation of kingdom influence on earth through Moses' submission to the purposes of the kingdom government. For example, Moses' ability to bring the plagues of locusts and flies was an example of a human being exercising dominion over all the creatures that move along the ground through the power of the king's spirit. The same is true for the miracle of the parting of the Red Sea that allowed the Israelites to cross over on foot and escape the pursuing Egyptians. Moses was the heavenly government's instrument to bring about many manifestations of kingdom influence on earth during his lifetime. I want to re-emphasize that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, and the Israelite nation were not preserved in order to create a religion. The nation of Israel was an instrument in the hand of the king's unfolding purposes to reconcile the whole world to himself and to restore the governor. It was not an end in itself. The Israelites were called and set apart as a special nation so they could rediscover the king and his ways for the purpose of becoming a nation with a holy, dedicated purpose. As we will shortly see, they were to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation to help fulfill the king's plan of restoration for the world. The Hebrew word for kingdom in this context is mamlaka, which means dominion or rule. Here we return to the theme of earthly dominion. Kingdom indicates governing responsibility, while the role of the priest was to help people become realigned with the heavenly government. In essence, priestly work involves lining up with true authority, and kingdom work has to do with executing rulership under that authority. The Creator King wanted a kingdom or nation of priests on earth. He wanted the entire nation of Israel to be properly aligned with him all the time, the way Adam and Eve had been when they still had the Spirit of the Creator living within them. Every human being was meant to be a priest, personally aligned with the Creator King, and a ruler having dominion over the earth. God had told the Israelites when they came out of Egypt that if they continued to believe and obey him, he would make them the greatest nation in the world. He gave them instructions for living, called the law. This was a comprehensive picture of how they were supposed to think and act as a kingdom of priests and rulers living in integrity. If they did so, he would provide for them and protect them. They would have everything they needed, and they would never be defeated by their enemies. The nation as a whole was to be a prototype of what the king would do for all who were submitted to his governor and were ruling their homes, communities, and nations under his guidance. Sadly, the nation of Israel didn't live up to its high purpose. The people rejected the laws of the king, just as Adam and Eve had. They were no longer in alignment with him. Consequently, they failed to be an example to other nations of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Although there were times when the people returned to their king, they rejected him over and over again throughout their history as a nation. Whenever this happened, the king allowed other nations which didn't acknowledge him to overrun them so they would see their need and return to him. Throughout the Old Testament, we read how the nation was often overtaken by other peoples, such as the Canaanites, Moabites, and Hittites.